Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to PowellMinistries.com, Blog Talk Radio, where we are interviewing the Holiness Movement. This is James Powell, your host.
God, we still trust. In God, we still trust. Here in America, He's the one you turn to every time the going gets rough. He is the source of our strength.
Good afternoon, and we welcome you to our blog show today. And we would like to invite you to go to our website, register your email to be entered into a giveaway for a Brent Vernon CD or a Brent's book necklace. But we do have a good friend of ours on today. He is a preacher, an evangelist. He is the former Bible Methodist Mission Secretary. It's Reverend John Parker. Reverend Parker, it is so good to have you with us, and if you would, please introduce yourself and let us know what is going on in your life at this point.
Well, good afternoon, James, and I'm glad to be with you today. I am just actually home for a few days. I'm trying to catch up with some chores around the house and do some things that need to be done before hitting the road again on Thursday. Right now, I am doing what I would just call freelance evangelism, traveling from church to church and some conferences, camps in the summer, and speaking wherever I'm invited to and able to get it in the schedule. This year has been a kind of year of transition. Last June, I finished up the second 4-year term as Director of Missions, and so in the interim, we're just trying to sort out God's will in our lives, and it seems like that the Lord is leading us back into a pastoral ministry. That's really where my heart is. We're right now actually in the process of determining where God wants us to go, and looks like we're getting close to that. So good things are happening. Good.
Well, I do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to allow us to do this interview with you. It's mainly about with your time as missions secretary. Although prayer is an obvious thing, with you dealing with the missionaries, I know that prayer is key for every missionary, but what would you consider another one of the important things that we who are at the churches can help missionaries?
Well, James, as a pastor, you know and understand the importance of team. You know, teamwork makes dream work.
Right.
And I've really come to a new appreciation for the importance of a support team for our missionaries, and there's no better support team than the home church or home churches. A book that has really challenged me really answers that question best, and I highly recommend it. It's by Neil Pirolo, Pirolo. He's the founding director of Emmaus Road International. You can find that on the web at www.eri.org. And in that, he really answers the question that you're asking. And I concur. I believe the most important way for pastors and churches to help missionaries is to serve as their sending/support team. And that involves more than just putting them on our prayer list and taking an offering for them. It really involves getting on the team and taking a role in that team. I was interested to find out in studying that for every one person in the military on the front lines, there's 9 other people somewhere working in lines of communication. They call it lines of support for that one person on the front line. And I really think that that's the way it should be in missions as well. The Apostle Paul asked a question in Romans 10 that wraps around a couple of very powerful gospel principles there. in verse 13 of Romans 10, he says, whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And then he starts in that series of logical, critical questions. How then shall they call on him they've not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they've not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And the critical question to this is, how shall they preach except they be sent? So it's the duty of churches, pastors, to be the sending team for missionaries, to enable them to do what God's called them to do. Perolo, in his book, has about 6 different focuses for the sending church or the sending team. And number 1, moral support, just causing a missionary to believe, to know that you believe in them and that you support them in their calling and confirm them in their calling. And that would include even very young missionaries that are feeling a call long before they ever get to the field. That moral support starts. Number 2 is logistics support, training, preparation, in education, legal, financial, physical preparation, and a lot could be said about that. Number 3 is financial support, and of course we all know about that when the formulating of a support team, a ministry budget for the missionary, and that can be done as a team, needs to be done as a team, and then raising the support, and then even more importantly, managing the support over the period of the time they're on the field. Number 4, he gives us prayer support, and that's putting together a prayer team that actually keeps the prayer chains going and the communication of prayer needs going. That's very important. We have that, of course, in our own connection. Number 5, communication support. This is really the PR side of missions, and it's so important. It's the lifeline of missions. Doing newsletters and websites and emails and public services where you share what's going on.
Right. And
the team can help with that. And then the last is one of the most neglected, and that is re-entry support. Debriefing return missionaries. When I say debriefing, I mean in the technical sense where you sit down with them and hear their heart and listen to what they're feeling and sensing as they come home and helping them readjust to the culture and changes that have taken place while they've been gone. And that involves some counseling, it involves some rest and relaxation, and it involves finances, and it involves some logistics as well. So I think that's how we as churches can help missionaries most.
Okay. All right. Well, we have about 22 minutes left here. How about a couple ways a church can help out a new missionary going to the field?
Good question. Number 1, I think send them to some kind of an orientation program. One that we know that's connected with us is the Summer Institute for Missionary Orientation, SEMO, that's hosted at Penview Bible Institute every summer. And Steve Mowry's the father of that. Great missionaries, great training. It'll prevent burnout. I think putting together an actual physical support team to help them get to the field, to care for them while they're on the field and facilitate their return from the field. All those things help a new missionary greatly. And in that team, there should be those who have some specific skills that are helpful to a new missionary. Computer and IT skills and graphic arts and those kind of things. Finances, very important that you have some financial people on your team. Medical, people that are able to kind of help you get your immunizations and deal with all of that. Somebody that can help you with communication issues, how to write a good newsletter, how to do a website, how to do attractive, informative, pungent emails, and then legal. Every missionary has some really serious legal challenges. I mean, like wills and if there's any property or assets that are left behind, all that kind of stuff needs to be taken into consideration as a new missionary is going out.
Okay. Well, I know that's probably one of the areas that can be overlooked. And that's the reason why I asked that. As General Missions Secretary, what were maybe a couple of the struggles that you faced as Secretary?
James, probably, without question, the greatest struggle is always having to be away from home and family. I never felt clear to do the kind of things I did as General Missionary Secretary as long as I had children at home. And actually my two youngest were finishing in college when I became Mission Secretary. During those intense years, I spent more than 300 days a year on the road or away from home, and almost all of it without my wife or family. And it was not because I wanted to. I think some people mistakenly think that there's some joy in getting the globetrot and run around the world by yourself, and that's absurd.
Right.
But it was just absolutely necessary, and it just for the budget, expenses, and all the rest of the things that go into factoring that to meet the financial challenges. The other struggle would be finances, not personal. I mean, for missions to meet the critical challenges. We had some huge deficits at the beginning that needed to be cared for and get our policies in order so that we didn't create deficits in the future, and we were able to do some of that to the tune of several $100,000. And then the economy kind of sank on us during my time, and we lost some big donors that were giving sizable donations, and I think that was a proving time for us. So it just required a lot more sweat and tears to get the bills paid, meet the challenges. And we were involved in some big building projects during that very time as well. The Philippine National Conference Center, which was huge, and we were able to do that and pay for it. And then we added some additional missionary families, while at the same time our conferences, which are the core of our support base, were doing some big projects themselves on their conference centers and campgrounds. But God gave us some ideas that enabled us to raise money outside of the normal channels. And I mean by that, normal channels within our Bible Methodist connection were what we called assessments or budgets for missions that each church and each conference gave. And when I became Mission Secretary, our total disbursements for the year 2000 were $189,000. And then 2008, it was $411,000. So you can see we had a huge increase, more than double, 117% actually.
Right.
And the support we got from the budgets was only a 46% increase over those 8 years. So we had to find money outside of the normal channels, and God enabled us to do that. So those were the big challenges. And it was amazing. I took more than a 50% cut in personal income when I took the position, and yet I lived better, and God took care of me in greater ways, better ways, while I was doing that than before.
Sure. Right. All right. Well, we have about 16 minutes left here. So could you give us maybe an outstanding highlight that you remember that kind of just excites you from having served as the missions secretary?
The problem would be which one of the outstanding highlights.
I figured that would be difficult.
I've got a long list of them, James. Probably the biggest and best was probably the hardest thing I ever did, and that was hiking way back into the mountains of northern Luzon, the Cordillera Mountains, to dedicate and participate in dedications for new churches that were being planted across those mountains. I really thought I'd die on one of those trips. It was so intensely hot and so steep, and my legs were gone, and yet we just kept pushing on. But wow, to get there and see other people that had walked, some of them a couple of days from remote villages and other churches, to come for that time, I'll just never get away from that. And their joyous worship, even though they're probably some of the poorest people on the face of the earth, those were highlights. Those are moments that you never get over. And ordaining new pastors, some of them that had been reached with the gospel in those remote villages and then come out for pastor training and church planter training, and now we're going back to plant churches in more remote villages. Speaking in some of those camp meetings out in the bush and having crude little shelters put up with bamboo poles and what tarpaulins they could gather together, banana leaves, and have them filled overflowing. And those are moments, man, that you just never forget. I mean, half the time your body's way beyond normal limits as far as heat and hardships and food, and many of the times I was sick from food, but wow, I'll never get over that.
Sure.
Seeing revival, probably one of the great highlights was seeing the revival of among the Zulus in KwaZulu-Natal and in South Africa. Amazing experience. And let me just add this one too, James. Probably my greatest thrill was loving on our missionary kids and letting them know that we cared about them, and just spending time with them, and just excitement of them seeing that most of our missionary kids wound up calling me Uncle John, and just see the excitement. I usually took bags and bags and bags of candy and a few little trinkets and worthless toys to them, but they were pretty happy to see me when I got there, and
sure,
and they knew that I loved them, and I think those were some real highlights.
Sure. Well, we have about 13 minutes left here. I know that everyone has heard about your experience with Brother Marc Sankey. If you would, maybe try to give us some highlights and maybe try to wrap up that experience of all that you went through with that.
It was October 23rd, 2009, and it's interesting. Today, they are in pastor training conferences or seminars there in Mexico, in Saltillo, Mexico today, actually. And it was one of those. I had flown into Mexico City and then caught a bus over to Querétaro and then on to Salamanca for those pastor training workshops. And our primary focus, the field team, missionary team, and I had been working very hard to try to get our pastors to understand how necessary it is to become more and more indigenous where their churches were supporting them. And we did have some opposition to that from some leadership on the field. And we just really been praying that God would help us to be able to get that through to them, that this is critical for the advancement of work. And on Thursday evening, we had a very special meeting to present that to them, and it was so obvious that God was there in a powerful way. And the pastors were broken and responsive and supportive, and it was so great. Actually, I took every single pastor and every pastor's wife and all their kids out for a meal after that meeting, and we were just in a celebratory mood. Early the next morning, Friday morning, October 23rd, Mark was taking me back to the bus station, hour and a half or so, Querétaro, to go back to Mexico City, fly home. And as we were driving down the toll road, which is an interstate freeway kind of thing, we were just rejoicing in what God had done the night before, and probably going way too fast. Mark's he drives fast. So, I think the more excited we got, the faster he was driving, maybe. But we were oblivious to anything but all the good things God had done for us, and just sharing our hearts and rejoicing. And all of a sudden, there were some large pieces, what looked like rocks, in the left lane that we were traveling in. Mark kind of hit the brakes and swerved to the right lane all at the same time to try to avoid those pieces of whatever it was in the road. And in the midst of that, two big rocks were thrown at us. Actually, both hit us. One hit right beside my head on the passenger side window and just skidded up across. Fortunately, did not come through the window. The other came straight through the windshield, right into Mark's forehead and face, and just smashed his head unbelievably. His skull was in 13 pieces, if I remember it all right. His eye was bulging from the socket. His nose was completely smashed. Blood was all over us and the vehicle. His hands dropped from the steering wheel. I thought he was dead. I had every reason to believe he was dead by the way he looked and by the way he sounded. I thought he was dead and just sitting upright, you know. I grabbed the steering wheel at the same time just crying out to God for mercy and help. And James, I don't know, I saw a guardrail off the shoulder of the road on the right-hand side of the road. And the more I think about it, the more I'm not sure the guardrail was physically there. But in my mind, there was a guardrail there. And so I drove down the road just holding the steering wheel, and Mark was not dead. He actually asked me what happened, and I started telling him to push the brake or the gas and the brake, and he was able to do that amazingly. Though his hands, he couldn't get on the steering wheel. But we got down the road maybe a half a mile or so, and I pulled off the shoulder, got out of the driver's seat in the passenger seat, and jumped in and took off as hard as I could go down the road, try to find help. And the glass was blowing through the big hole in the windshield, and Mark was making horrible sounds, and I didn't think he'd live to get anywhere, just pleading with God for mercy. In the middle of all that, amazingly, his cell phone rang, and it was Melody. God had awakened her, and just that sense of a wife, and she knew something was wrong, and all I told her quickly that we'd have been attacked, and I was getting Mark to help, and got off the phone with her, pulled into a little convenience station rest area thing, right up to the door, jumped out, covered in blood, ran inside, no Spanish. I did know, I think actually Melody might have told me the word for help or emergency. And of course, I didn't have to say anything. They grabbed the phone and started calling for an ambulance. In the process of all that, I was outside just trying to keep alive, keep him from, I don't want to be too graphic, but from strangling on the blood and asphyxiating. And out of the clear blue, a Mexican businessman walked up in a suit, and he spoke English. And I said, "Sir, can you please tell me which is the best hospital in this entire area? I need to take this man to the best hospital." And he told me, CMQ Medical Center. I understood it. When the ambulance arrived, Mark looked so bad that the attendants just basically sat there dumb, that they didn't even get out. And I got Mark out of the vehicle, walked him around the back of the ambulance, opened the door, and put him in. And they're trying to get their gloves on. I think they were pretty upset with me for what I was doing. But anyway, Mark was still ambulatory, so we weren't wasting any time.
Right.
And I told them which hospital to take him to. They seemed to understand, and then I got behind them, and we drove like maniacs, really unbelievably fast, to that hospital with glass blowing all in my face as we sped along, and I stayed as close to that screaming ambulance as I could. And James, God was so in that whole business, because the one hospital in the entire area that had a resident neurosurgeon that we desperately needed for Mark's head injuries, and a resident eye surgeon that would be able to repair the damage to his eye, and a resident plastic surgeon that would rebuild all of his face and head. The only place, and many people told us Mark would probably have died from infection and who knows what else, maybe not even live to have surgery had he gone to any other hospital. The neurosurgeon, renowned, even comes here to the States to lecture in neurology, had planned to be out of town and had gotten delayed for surgery and was there. And in just a short while, he was doing surgery on Mark's head. And God was so real. There's so many little sidelines to this whole story. In the midst of it, our pastor showed up after the conference had ended in the morning, and that we had a great prayer team, and it was amazing how God made himself known to us. Brother and Sister Sam, Claire, and Noble were there with us. They were actually still with the pastors, but they came, and they were able to take care of the Sankey's kids, and it was an amazing, amazing thing to see God intervene, and how Mark doesn't have sheer permanent damage is beyond my imagination, to be truthful with you. But God was
it's wonderful to see how God can just intervene in a miraculous way. And I know all the churches were praying, and that's why I kind of wanted you to highlight, all this. It's kind of hard to sum it up all in a few minutes. We've got about 4 minutes, remaining here. First of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you for taking the time for this interview, and give you a couple minutes if you'd like to give out your email or any way someone would like to contact you for revival or whatever. But you can give your closing comments however you'd like, Reverend Parker.
Well, James, I appreciate you. I know that you are an innovative and risk taker with doing what you're doing, and you're to be commended for your heart for God and for the kingdom of God. I know you're not getting rich on this, are you?
No, sir.
Maybe someday the Lord will bless you from some. But I have a heart for anybody that's got a heart for God. I'll be honest with you. And right now, my desire is to get back into pastoral ministry. I've got a pastor's heart, and I've really enjoyed the evangelism thing. And I have to say, God's been very good. We've had great meetings. But I'm really counting today till I'm back in a localized kind of ministry, ministering to people and being a shepherd again. So I'm really not looking for meetings. I've probably got all I need and a few more too right now. So, but I am willing, if anybody wants to communicate with me, I'm willing to be your friend. I am on Facebook, and you can find me there. And my email address is simple. It's John Parker, JOHNPARKER @gmail.com. And anybody's welcome to contact me. Just looking forward to what God's got in store for us.
Thank you again very much, Parker. I know we kind of have a little bit deeper connection, being my wife is from your wife's hometown,
yeah.
or close in the vicinity home church.
Actually, your father was my wife's mom's pastor, and her pastor, home church at Wheatland Wesleyan there. So.
Yes. So, all right. Well, again, thank you very much, and we trust that God will richly bless your ministry wherever He has you to go, and I have truly appreciated this interview today.
You're welcome, James. Bless you.
All right. Thank you.